Hello, story lovers, and welcome back to my channel, Tales with Tasha. I am Tasha and I am a storyteller. I hope you will enjoy the stories on my channel as much as I do. This is our last week of our month of romance, and this week our theme was Monster Mash, classic horror monsters and themes mixed together for delightful fun. This week's long story is The Mummy Meets Dracula. Well, at least it has vampire mummies. Don't forget to let me know your favourite genres or themes in the comments so I can make sure to have you covered in planning for the rest of 2022. If you are enjoying my stories, please subscribe to support the channel. For those unfamiliar with YouTube, it's free. And also, smash that thumbs up like button if today's tale brings a smile to your face. Thank you, lovelies. And comment below to let me know what you thought of the story. This story is what I would define as PG-ish. Nothing graphic in it, and funny and romantic, but not suitable for younger viewers due to some of the implied themes. With that being said, make sure you're sitting comfortably, and let's jump right on in. Egyptian Undead, You Keep My Heart in a Jar by Natasha Duncan Drake. A startled gasp pulled Dorothy from sleep. Even as her eyes flew open, she knew something was wrong. She had just enough time to see a moving mallet before it hit wood. "Oh, bug!" was as far as she got before there was a flash of pain and her mind and body shut down in self-defense. Waking up was unpleasant. The thud of wood on carpet accompanied the sharp agony of a healing wound as she sat up, clutching her chest and moaning her displeasure. The room around her was dark and empty, but as she stilled, she could still hear people in the house. Turning, she found where the gasp that had woken her had come from. Buneb was lying on the other side of their shared bed, eyes staring at the ceiling, mouth open in shock with a stake wobbling its way out of his chest. Dorothy reached over and pulled it the rest of the way out to save time. The hunters had to have overdone it with her husband, because he was far older than she was and usually shook off such inconveniences much faster. Dorothy threw the stake into the corner with all the contempt she could manage. She would have thrown it harder and smashed it to smithereens, but she didn't want to alert their moronic intruders that they had cocked up. Stakes were evil. If they had been the simple vampires the hunters had clearly thought they were, they would have been inconveniently deadly. Things made of metal or stone or even plastic vampires could shake off, but not wood. Wood was tricky. It was fatal to most of the undead and caused a complete shutdown for her and Buneb. If it happened during the day, they had to put up with the annoyance of waiting until nightfall to heal. Most frustrating. If the hunters had wrecked her house while she was out of it, she would make them pay. While the burn that was fading from her chest annoyed her, what was worse was the blood all over their new Egyptian cotton sheets. That was never coming out, and her favourite pyjamas were ruined. She climbed out of bed as she waited for her husband's body to get over the trauma of being staked through the heart. Well, staked through a fake heart in their case, since their hearts were no longer in their bodies. She and Buneb could pass as human, even having a heartbeat and blood flow to the casual observer, but the organs were all reflections of what had once been. They weren't really in situ. Their canopic jars were very well hidden in a safe in the cellar, behind 4 levels of security, just to be extra careful. As Dorothy had found out in the 1930s in Egypt, there were advantages to being a vampire mummy rather than a classic Dracula type, although at the time she had started on the other side of the divide. Their weakness was still their heart, but any hunter had to smash a canopic jar first and then drive a stake through it. Pulling off her ruined top, she threw it in the corner with the stake. It squelched against the wall before falling down beside the hunter's weapon of choice. The room was going to have to be deep cleaned anyway. There was blood everywhere. Contrary to most classic films about vampires, killing one was very messy. Killing two looked like a scene from a low-budget slasher flick. She saw Buneb twitch, so walked around to his side of the bed. As he reared up just as she had, she clapped a hand over his mouth. For a second he struggled, before their eyes met and reality reasserted itself. She put her fingers to her lips. "We have company," she whispered at a level only he would be able to hear. He nodded, clearly understanding. She doubted he had had a chance to know what was going on, since the hunters went after him first. One thing they had got right. If her darling husband had had time to remotely think, their bedroom would have been even more of a disaster area. When Buneb was defending those he loved, he tended to regress to, "How dare you? Meet your end in the grisliest manner possible. I am a prince of Egypt." Taking her hand away, she walked into their ensuite bathroom and grabbed 2 towels, giving one to her husband when she returned. Buneb slept naked, and wasn't that a lovely view? So he didn't have anything to take off, just blood to remove. They would need a long, hot shower later, when Dorothy would have time to admire her husband's shapely behind properly. But there were more important things to worry about now. As she was cleaning up, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. There in the window was one of their cats, Midnight. Midnight was pure white with one large black patch in the centre of his forehead. Dorothy had named him just to be contrary. It was that attitude that had seen her on a dig in Egypt in the first place, in a time when it had not been a ladylike thing to do. She crossed to the window quickly, opening it just enough to let the cat in. Midnight gave a tiny meow, and Dorothy ran her hand along the creature's back. Immediately the distorted image of the front hall leapt into her mind. She heard a glass crack, then something was thrown through and clouds of gas filled the air before the door burst in. That explained why they had not been alerted by any of their 12 cats. Unlike the rumours in the village, they weren't just crazy cat people. Their pets also acted as their daytime guardians. Vampires were not technically helpless when the sun was up, but they could literally sleep through a hurricane, which was why they needed a little help. The hunters at least seemed to have had that part right. If the hunters had hurt any of her babies, she was going to take a leaf out of her husband's book and go all New Kingdom feel my wrath on their arses too. Their cats might have picked up a touch of immortality from their symbiotic relationship, but that didn't mean they were invulnerable. "Thank you, sweetie," she whispered, lifting the cat up and kissing his head, before passing him to Buneb. In return, Buneb held out a t-shirt for her to put on, while his eyes went glassy as he communed with the cat. It was a useful little gift of their particular type of vampire. She slipped the garment over her head and waited as Buneb put Midnight down, finished cleaning up and pulled on joggers and the rattiest t-shirt he owned. They were ready to take on the idiots. Any competent hunter would have got in and got out as fast as possible. These ones were not only uninformed, but dumb as well. Dorothy could forgive them for not being clear on the details of their species. After all, as far as she knew, there were only 4 vampire mummies in existence. Buneb and his sister's life partner, and her. Buneb and his sister had been created by a priest messing with powers he should definitely not have been messing with, and Buneb and his sister had managed to create themselves an equal. None of them were entirely clear on how, hence their rarity. Not that Dorothy was sure she would ever want to make someone in her own image, even if she did know how to do it. She was used to biting people now, but it had scandalized all her sensibilities in the beginning. The idea of actually killing someone with her bite made her shudder. However, Killing people with her bare hands if they had so much as scratched her hardwood floors was another matter entirely. She couldn't help it. Vampires got very possessive over their homes. It was a character flaw. If humans thought moving house was difficult, they should try it as a vampire. There was a reason they had only moved 3 times in just under 100 years. They had only been in this one 10 years, and she just about had it how she wanted it. Letting Buneb take the lead, she followed her husband out of the bedroom towards the stairs, with midnight trailing behind them. All the noise was coming from below. It sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. There was also light coming from that direction. What she saw as they crept up to the door had her throwing caution to the wind. There were 4 invaders, and they were all standing around her kitchen island, stealing pizza bites from the tray she had had laid out in the larder. Of all the nerve! She was at her husband's shoulder as they stormed in. The expressions on their faces when the hunters saw them was priceless. "Those are for the church fete!" Dorothy screeched at the shocked-looking group of heavily armed men. She was never going to be able to make another batch before the morning. The dough had to be proved overnight for the best flavour. The 4 hunters stared at her stupidly, one with his mouth hanging open half full of her pizza bites, which was, frankly, disgusting. "You're dead," was the best one of the group could do. "No," Dorothy replied, "my favourite pyjamas are dead, but you didn't do your research, so we're undead and kicking." "Who sent you?" Buneb demanded. He could be very poetic with his words when he chose to be, but her husband was a man of few when it came to enemies. One of the men went to lift his gun rather than replying. "Do you really want to annoy us more?" Dorothy asked in her best scathing tone. "If you wreck my kitchen, I will do worse to your nether regions." The man froze. "We'll die before we tell you monsters anything," the man who had spoken before said, looking utterly ridiculous as he puffed out his chest. Dorothy decided he had to be the leader of the group. His companions didn't look so sure about his pronouncement, however. "Monsters," she said. "You're the ones who invaded our home." "You're blood-sucking fiends and agents of evil," the man said with self-righteous surety. "How dare you?" she said. "We are not," Buneb agreed at the same time. "You're vampires," the man insisted, hand reaching for his gun. Buneb changed his form, eyes shining red, skin going grey and shrinking onto his bones, teeth elongating into vicious fangs, filling his mouth, and nails growing into dangerous talons. It was his battle form. Dorothy still remembered how horrified she had been when she had first seen it. Of course, she had been one of those that had broken the seals on his tomb, and he'd been trapped in there for over 2,000 years, so he hadn't exactly been rational at the time. She found it rather stimulating these days. Luckily for the idiot hunter, the man turned pale and stopped moving rather than attacking. At least the morons appeared to realise they were outclassed. "Well, of course we're vampires," Dorothy decided to continue doing the talking, since Buneb tended to lisp in his current form, and that undid some of the scare value. "But that doesn't mean you have any right to burst into our home to try and kill us. It's rude." "You kill people," the hunter leader said in a plaintive tone. "We do not," Dorothy said, offended. "Well, not unless they are particularly troublesome." For a second, she could all but see the thoughts spinning behind the man's eyes as he tried to compute that. "But you drink human blood," he tried again. "And like cell phones and the internet, in this incredible century there is a marvellous invention called a blood bag," she countered, and lifted her eyebrow at him. Not that she was bragging, but she had won many an argument with just that eyebrow. She let her eyes glow for good measure because she was dealing with idiots. "What?" one of the others asked. "Blood bags," Dorothy repeated, slowly and clearly, as if she was talking to a 3-year-old. "We purchased them. Check the cupboard behind you." The man looked at his leader, who nodded. The cupboard opened with a creak. "Button under the blocked-off shelf, on the left side," Dorothy told him. After a couple of seconds of groping around, he must have found it because the false door slid back to reveal the mini-fridge they used to store their current supply. The hunter opened it to reveal 2 neat rows of blood bags. Dorothy was not about to mention the amicable arrangement they had with the couple down the road, which did involve biting and copious amounts of pleasure on both sides. It was lucky the hunters hadn't found the cellar, because explaining the little play dungeon to religious fanatics probably wouldn't have gone well. She was only guessing, but the crosses on the hunter's body armour made her think they were unlikely to be secular. "You're still demons," the leader of the group protested. "Oh, please," Dorothy said. "My husband predates the beginning of Christianity by over 1,000 years. You have no right to judge him. Just because you don't understand what we are doesn't mean we're wandering around plotting the coming of the Antichrist." "He does look a bit demonic," one of the others offered in a tone that suggested he was trying very hard not to piss her off. "A charging rhino probably looks a bit demonic too if you're on the receiving end," she shot back. "And you did invade our house with stakes and guns." The poor man looked a bit embarrassed when she said that. If he hadn't been part of trying to murder them, she might have felt sorry for him. "For the greater good," the leader said, again with the self-righteous tone. "More like we pinged one of your detection devices and you didn't bother to check your facts," she said, and gave him a glare. The way he couldn't meet her eyes told her she'd hit the nail on the head with that one. "What are you going to do?" the last idiot asked, having finally shut his mouth and swallowed his pizza bite. "That depends," she told them. "Where are our cats?" Midnight chose that moment to jump onto the counter and make the hunter closest to him jump out of his skin. "Locked in the cupboard under the stairs," one of the other 3 said. He got glared at by his commander for that. "Did you hurt any of them?" Dorothy demanded. "We're not animals," the leader said, as if offended by that suggestion. Dorothy almost laughed. Almost. "I beg to differ," she replied. "Waking up to find a stake being rammed through your chest gives a bad impression of those doing it. It's very bad manners." "Sorry," one of the hunters muttered, which showed at least someone had brought him upright to begin with. Apparently, that was enough to break even their commander's spirit, because the man just sagged. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, having had enough of the whole thing. "Darling, go and let the cats out. I'm going to put the kettle on." Buneb gave her a look. "Well, it's that or get entrails all over the kitchen," she said. "Do you want to have to explain to Marjorie why there is blood in what's left of the pizza bites?" "No," he replied as he flowed back into his human form. "Wrap those back up and put them back where you found them," she instructed as her husband headed into the hall, and she took charge. "We are going to have a long and frank discussion about not making assumptions, exactly what I will do to each of you if you so much as ever suggest I am evil ever again, and where I know for a fact you can find a monster deserving of your attentions. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am," all 4 men said, and meekly began to follow her instructions. They still better not have scratched her floors, though. Thank you so much for joining me for our tale of vampire mummies and terribly rude hunters. I very much hope it made you smile. Please let me know what you thought in the comments. Thank you. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button and give this story a like. And it would make me ecstatically happy if you would subscribe to the channel. It really helps me and boosts the channel, and it's totally free apart from the odd ad. Thank you so much. There is an ebook version of the story on Amazon and all the other major retailers if you would like a copy to keep. The micro stories for this week are also in the book. There is a link in the description or scan the QR code on screen now. See you next week. As always, we'll have 4 YouTube shorts on Monday to Thursday and another longer video on Friday. Ruby would now like to show everyone the proper way to relax. Thank you for watching.